Now, I wonder... Monty, I think we ought to land right in the middle of the enclosure, on that open plaza thing, in front of the building that looks like a reconditioned church. That's probably the Royal Palace, or the Pentagon, or the Kremlin, or whatever. Altamont started to object, paused, and then nodded. I think you're right, Jim. From the way they scattered and got their livestock into the woods, they probably expect us to bomb them. We have to get inside, and that's the quickest way to do it. He thought for a moment. We'd better be armed when we go out. Pistols, auto carbines, and a few of those concussion grenades in case we have to break up a concerted attack. I'll get them. The plaza, the houses and the cabins around it, the 200-year-old church, all were silent and apparently lifeless as they set the helicopter down. Once Ludens caught a movement inside the door of a house and saw a metallic glint. "There's a gun up there," he said. "Looks like a 4-pounder, brass. I knew that Smith shop was also a foundry. See that little curl of smoke? That's the gunner's slow match." "I thought maybe that thing on the island was a powder mill. That would be where they'd put it. Probably extract their niter from the dung of their horses and cows. Sulfur, probably from the coal mine drainage." "Jim, this is really something." "I hope they don't cut loose with that thing," Ludens said, looking apprehensively at the brass-rimmed black muzzle that was covering them from the belfry. "I wonder if we ought to... Oh, here they come." 3 or 4 young men stepped out of the wide door of the old church. They wore fringed buckskin trousers and buckskin shirts, and odd caps of deerskin with visors to shade the eyes, and similar beaks behind to protect the neck. They had powder horns and bullet pouches slung over their shoulders, and long rifles in their hands. They stepped aside as soon as they were out, carefully avoiding any gesture of menace. They simply stood, watching the helicopter which had landed in their village. 3 other men followed them out. They too wore buckskins and the odd double-visored caps. One had a close-cropped white beard, and on the shoulders of his buckskin shirt he wore the single silver bars of a first lieutenant of the vanished United States Army. He had a pistol on his belt. The pistol had the saw-handled grip of an automatic, but it was a flintlock, as were the rifles of the young men who stood so watchfully on either side of the door. 2 middle-aged men accompanied the bearded man, and the trio advanced toward the helicopter. "All right, come on, Monty." Ludens opened the door and let down the steps. Picking up an auto carbine, he slung it and stepped out of the helicopter, Altamont behind him. They advanced to meet the party from the church, halting when they were about 20 feet apart. "I must apologize, Lieutenant, for dropping in on you so unceremoniously." Ludens stopped, wondering if the man with the white beard understood a word of what he was saying. "The natural way to come in when you travel in the air," the old man replied. "At least you came in openly. I can promise you a better reception than you got at the city to the west of us a couple of days ago." "Now how did you know that we had trouble in the day before yesterday?" Ludens demanded. The old man's eyes sparkled with childlike pleasure. "That surprises you? My dear sir, in a moment I dare say you'll be surprised at the simplicity of it. You have a nasty rip in the left leg of your trousers, and the cloth around it is stained with blood. Through the rip I perceive a bandage. Obviously you have suffered a recent wound. I further observe that the side of your flying machine bears recent scratches, as though from the spears or throwing hatchets of the scourers. Evidently they attacked you as you were landing. It is fortunate that these cannibal devils are too stupid and too anxious for human flesh to exercise patience." Well, that explains how you knew we'd recently been attacked, Ludens told him. But how did you guess that it had been to the west of here, in a ruined city? I never guess, the oldster with the silver bar and the keystone-shaped red patch on his left shoulder replied. It is a shocking habit, destructive to the logical faculties. What seems strange to you is only so because you do not follow my train of thought. For example, the wheels and their framework under your flying machine are splashed with mud, which seems to be predominantly brick dust, mixed with plaster. Obviously, you landed recently in a dead city, either during or after a rain. There was a rain here yesterday evening, the wind being from the west. Obviously, you followed behind the rain as it came up the river, and now that I look at your boots, I see traces of the same sort of mud around the soles and in front of the heels. But this is heartless of us, keeping you standing here on a wounded leg, sir. Come in and let our medic take a look at it. Well, thank you, Lieutenant, Ludens replied. But don't bother your medic. I've attended to the wound myself, and it wasn't serious to begin with. You are a doctor? The white-haired man asked. Of sorts. A sort of general scientist. My name is Ludens. My friend, Mr. Altamont here, is a scientist too. There was an immediate reaction. All three of the elders of the village, and the young riflemen who had accompanied them, exchanged glances of surprise. Ludens dropped his hand to the grip of his slung auto-carbine, and Altamont sidled away from his partner, his hand moving as if by accident toward the butt of his pistol. The same thought was in both men's minds, that these people might feel, as the heritage of the war of 2 centuries ago, a hostility to science and scientists. There was no hostility, however, in their manner, as the old man came forward with outstretched hand. I am Tenant Mycroft Jones, the Toon leader here, he said. This is Stamford Rawson, our reader, and Verner Hughes, our Toon Sarge. This is his son, Murray Hughes, the Toon Sarge of the Irregulars. But come into the HQ house, gentlemen. We have much to talk about. By this time, the villagers had begun to emerge from the log cabins and rubble-walled houses around the plaza and the old church. Some of them, mostly the young men, were carrying rifles, but the majority were unarmed. About half of them were women, in short deerskin skirts or homespun dresses. There were a number of children, the younger ones almost completely naked. Sarge, the old man told one of the youths, post a guard over this flying machine. Don't let anybody meddle with it, and have all the non-coms and techs report here on the double. He turned and shouted up at the truncated steeple. Atherton, sound all clear. A horn up in the belfry began blowing, apparently to advise the people who had run from the fields into the forest that there was no danger. They went through the open doorway of the old stone church and entered the big room inside. The building had evidently once been gutted by fire, 2 centuries ago, but portions of the wall had been restored. The floor had been replaced by one of rough planks, and there was a plank ceiling at about 10 feet. The room was apparently used as a community centre. There were a number of benches and chairs, all very neatly made, and along one wall, out of the way, 10 or 15 long tables had been stacked, the tops in a pile and the trestles on the tops. The walls were decorated with trophies of weapons, a number of M12 rifles and M16 submachine guns, all in good, clean condition, a light machine rifle, 2 bazookas. Among them were cruder weapons, stone and metal-tipped spears and clubs, the work of the wild men of the woods. A stairway led to the second floor, and it was up this stairway that the man who bore the title of Toon Leader conducted them to a small room furnished with a long table, a number of chairs, and several big wooden chests bound with iron. Sit down, gentlemen, the Toon Leader invited, going to a cupboard and producing a large bottle